The morning it happened, I didn't feel anything unusual. The Arizona sky stretched wide and cloudless as always, the desert heat still gentle from the early hour. I was sipping my usual black coffee in the truck, with Ranger, my black lab, snoozing peacefully in the back seat. We were just heading back from a short supply run, tires humming against the dusty trail, sun bouncing off the windshield. Everything felt normal until I saw it. At first I thought it was a mirage, a trick of light or maybe construction work further up the road. But the closer I got, the more real and more wrong it became. I slammed on the brakes. My truck jerked to a violent halt, raising a choking storm of red dirt around us. I stepped out slowly, my boots crunching against gravel in disbelief. My ranch gate, the only legal access point to my property, was sealed shut. Not just locked, welded. Thick steel poles bolted and concreted into the earth like prison bars. A wide sign hung from the center: access denied, HOA regulation zone. No entry without clearance. I stood there for what felt like minutes, my hand resting on the hood of my truck, heartbeat loud in my ears. I wasn't just being blocked, I was being erased. The gate led to 600 acres of land that had been in my family for generations, Rocking W Ranch. My grandfather ran cattle here long before there was even a notion of an HOA in the region. This land was exempt, protected under a 1978 preservation clause. I had the paperwork, the deeds, and even a county judge's affirmation that the ranch lay well outside the Twin Creeks HOA jurisdiction. And yet, here I was, standing in front of a barricade that said otherwise. The steel was still shiny, freshly welded. Whoever did this hadn't even waited for the dust to settle from their last truck. I could smell the metallic tang of new iron. I approached the gate and placed both palms on the cold surface. It didn't budge, didn't creak. It had been built to last. My hands curled into fists. 2 weeks prior, I'd received a letter from the HOA. It was worded smugly, all legalese and bureaucratic fluff, about territorial oversight and shared infrastructure interests. I'd laughed when I first read it, tossed it in a drawer, and forgot about it. Because I knew that letter had no legal standing over my ranch. The audacity of it barely registered then. But now, looking at the gate, I realized something much worse. This wasn't about confusion. This was deliberate. And whoever orchestrated it didn't expect me to push back. That was their first mistake. The name at the bottom of the sign confirmed what I already suspected. Carl Hopkins, HOA president, a man with the soul of a stapler and the charm of cold oatmeal. He had moved into the house closest to the dirt road that wound past Twin Creeks and up to my land about a year ago. Since then, it had been an uphill battle of passive-aggressive notes, unsolicited HOA mailers, and a few confrontations that started with Mr. Walker, may I remind you, and ended with me slamming the door. Carl was the kind of man who thought a clipboard gave him moral authority. He wasn't content managing lawn heights and trash bins, he wanted empires. And my land, my road, my freedom, they all sat like a splinter in his vision of order. I took a step back and snapped a picture of the gate, hands trembling slightly. Not from fear, but from rage so sharp it felt surgical. Ranger barked once from the truck, as if echoing my mood. This wasn't the first warning sign, and I had been stupid to ignore the others. The man in the yellow vest, claiming to be a surveyor, who disappeared as soon as I mentioned private land rights. The mysterious flyers stuffed in my mailbox about voluntary beautification compliance. Even the time I came back from a short hunting trip to find my mailbox flattened and a note sticking out of the dirt. This property needs order. You've been warned. I had chalked it up to overzealous retirees with too much time and too little empathy. But it was more than that. This was a calculated move. 3 days before the gate incident, Ranger had gone missing. That dog doesn't stray. Trained in the military, loyal to the bone, I searched everywhere, called out to neighbors, drove around till midnight. When I found him, he was limping, bleeding from a small cut on his flank, and had a zip-tied tag on his collar. HOA issued. Inside was a note. Maybe next time he'll stay inside. I'd felt my hands shake then, too, but I let it go. Told myself it wasn't worth the fight. That morning, staring at the barricade, I realized it had always been a fight. I was just the last one to pick up my sword. So I called the sheriff, filed a formal complaint for trespassing and property obstruction. But then came the second blow. The county clerk told me the access road had been rezoned just a month ago, apparently because I hadn't objected to a published notice buried in some bulletin board no one reads. The road had been reassigned as a community maintenance route, which gave Twin Creeks and Carl just enough leeway to claim shared authority. That's when I knew I wasn't dealing with amateurs. I was dealing with bureaucratic predators. People who weaponize paperwork the way others wield fists. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark cabin, the same one I'd rebuilt with my own hands after leaving the Army. I looked out the window at the faint shimmer of moonlight across the dusty ridge, the same moon that had watched my great-grandfather plant the first fence posts. That moon hadn't seen me lose yet, and it wouldn't start now. I called Patrick my cousin, a land attorney with the instincts of a bloodhound and the tenacity of a bulldozer. I explained everything: the gate, the letters, the rezoning, the assault on Ranger. He listened silently. Then he said one sentence that changed everything. Let's buy them out from underneath. It was a crazy plan. Insane. But it made sense. If the HOA wanted to play land games, we'd play better, cleaner, smarter, harder. But that part comes later. Right now, I want you to see what I saw that day, not just the metal bars welded across my gate, but the smug hand behind them. The logic that said, we don't like this landowner, so let's box him out. The system that favors order over justice. That empowers petty tyrants like Carl Hopkins to redraw maps with ink and arrogance. And more than anything, I want you to remember this: the moment you let someone decide how you access your land, your life, your legacy, that's the moment you start losing it. But me, I wasn't raised to yield. I was raised by ranchers. We don't scream. We don't flinch. We calculate. We reclaim. We build from the ground up. And if someone welds our gate shut, we buy the road. Then we buy the view. And then we make them pay for the breeze that runs through it. The next morning, I woke up not to birds or the sound of wind through mesquite trees, but to the low rumble of diesel engines near the ridge. That wasn't normal. Nothing ever moved up there unless it had a reason. I pulled on my boots, grabbed my binoculars, and hiked up the slope behind my cabin, where the tree line thinned just enough to give me a vantage point over the west side of Twin Creeks. What I saw made my stomach tighten like barbed wire. 3 white trucks, no plates. Men in safety vests unloading what looked like surveying equipment in concrete molds. They weren't just trespassing anymore. They were laying down roots. I recognized one of them. Not by name, but by his stance, the same guy who had been snooping around my fence line weeks back, pretending to be from the county roads department. I knew better now. These weren't just HOA henchmen. These were the kinds of contractors people like Carl Hopkins hired to build their version of authority from the ground up quietly, quickly, and without consent. By noon, the men had staked orange flags across a line that cut through what used to be wild land. Technically, it still was. That patch didn't belong to the HOA or to me. It was open, county-owned scrubland, ignored for decades. But apparently, someone had filed paperwork. Carl's name was stamped on a zoning permit I later pulled from the recorder's office. He planned to turn that stretch into a community walking path, which just so happened to block off my secondary cattle trail, the one I used to rotate herds between grazing sectors. Coincidence? Not a damn chance. I realized something else. Then this wasn't about aesthetics or neighborhood order. This was personal, and I was the target. That night, I met with Patrick at the local diner just outside Safford. We sat in a corner booth, coffee lukewarm, plates of untouched meatloaf cooling between us. I spread out the pictures I'd taken from the ridge, zoning permits, HOA letters, even a new notice I'd received that morning about pending infrastructure alignment near the creek bed. Patrick didn't say a word for several minutes. He just scanned everything, eyes sharp, knuckles tapping against the vinyl booth. Then he looked up and said, "We buy the perimeter." That was his plan: simple, surgical, and brutal. The Twin Creeks HOA didn't own the land around their borders. They leased it, assumed its usage, or relied on outdated neighborly handshakes that never translated into deeds. We'd find the weak links, approach the owners quietly through a shell company, and flip the land right out from under them. At first, I thought it was too aggressive, but Patrick just shrugged. "You want to argue morality with people who welded your gate shut?" He had a point. We moved fast. Blue Cactus Holdings was formed by the end of the week, fronted by a friend of Patrick's from law school who lived 3 states away and had zero ties to Arizona. The name was neutral, local sounding, and untraceable to me. We began with the lots furthest from the HOA clubhouse, small parcels, half-used or neglected, owned by retirees who had moved to Phoenix or grown kids who didn't even remember inheriting them. We offered above-market prices with cash on hand, no inspections, no questions, just fast deals and quick exits. Within 10 days, we had locked down 37% of the land buffering Twin Creeks. But then we hit a stretch of 5 acres that sat along the creek, partially used as a dog trail and picnic area. The owner, an old rancher named Edgar Moreau, his land wasn't just adjacent, it was sentimental, stubborn, and locked in years of hostility with Twin Creeks. When I first met him, he sat on his porch cleaning a shotgun, not in a threatening way, just matter of fact, like brushing his teeth. He listened as I laid out what Carl had done to me. Then he leaned forward and said, "That little clipboard bastard once tried to fine me for having a rusted bird bath. Let's talk price." He didn't want money, not really. What Edgar wanted was legacy and payback. We negotiated over coffee and whiskey for 4 hours. By the end, he offered me the land for half of what we'd expected to pay. Under one condition, I had to promise to put it to damn good use. I did. That parcel unlocked a strategic advantage, a legal easement buried in an old land act that would allow us to build a private access road cutting through HOA territory if we met certain agricultural criteria. We filed the paperwork the next day. The response was silence at first, then came the retaliation. A week later, I returned from a feed supply run to find the trench we'd dug for waterline repairs filled with solid concrete. Not just rubble, not an accident poured and finished with a stamped HOA logo sprayed in black across the surface. It was like they wanted me to know they had done it. I didn't panic. I didn't call anyone. I just stood there, boots on the edge of that hard slab, staring at the insult. Ranger stood next to me, growling low. They were trying to choke my land, not just legally, but physically. And I knew what that meant. They were running out of patience. So was I. That night at 4:15 a.m., we were under the pale light of a desert moon. I climbed into a backhoe I'd rented under Blue Cactus Holdings and tore that concrete trench wide open. I didn't care how loud it was. I didn't care who saw. I ripped into it like it was a bone that needed breaking to heal right. And underneath, bruised but intact, my water line waited. I worked until dawn. When the first light touched the horizon, the flow of water was back, and my land exhaled. They showed up at noon. Carl, Linda with her damned binoculars, and Jim from finance who once asked to audit my catalogs. Carl didn't speak at first. He just stared, arms crossed, watching me reconnect a valve. Finally, he muttered, "You've destroyed community property." I didn't look up. I just said, "This isn't your community." It never was. Linda looked like she wanted to cry or scream, maybe both. Jim just turned and walked away. That same afternoon, Patrick called. We'd closed on another 21% of the surrounding parcels. That brought us up to 78% control, enough to start redrawing access terms. He sent official notices to the HOA terms of use, landscape management fees, and new dues reflecting our ownership. Tripled, legally justified, bulletproof. The reaction, pure chaos. Word spread fast. Homeowners showed up in droves to a town hall. Carl tried to maintain order, but the dam had cracked. People shouted, argued, asked why they were paying $900 a month for access to trails they didn't own. By the time it ended, 3 board members had resigned. I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. I watched it all from a drone we'd installed just outside the new fence. It streamed 24/7 on a site Patrick had set up hawkaged. Irony, justice, maybe both. But it didn't stop there. The next morning, I found fresh tire marks near the eastern trail. 2 stakes pulled from the new fence line. Someone had tried to tamper with it overnight. That night, I installed motion-triggered floodlights and doubled the camera coverage. And I started sleeping with my boots by the door. Because this wasn't just about boundary lines anymore. It wasn't about dues or land rights or some HOA charter. This was war. A war fought with concrete, with contracts, with silence and signatures. But war all the same, and I didn't start it. I just refused to lose it. It was just past 3:00. When I got the call, I had barely closed my eyes, still half-dressed from another long night reviewing easement maps with Patrick. My phone buzzed violently against the wood nightstand. I picked it up without checking the caller ID. Randy. The voice was tense, low, urgent. It was Javier, my ranch manager. One of the outer barns is on fire. I was out of bed and fully alert in seconds. How bad? Bad enough, he said. Flames were through the roof when I got the call from the East field worker. We're putting it out now, but it's mostly gone. I didn't even answer. I was already pulling on my boots, Ranger pacing beside me, his ears back and tail stiff. By the time we got to the barn, the fire was mostly out, reduced to a smoky skeleton. Charred wood and warped metal steamed in the cold dawn air, the sharp scent of burning feet and rubber hanging heavy like a curse. I walked the perimeter silently, stepping over cracked beams, shattered glass, melted tools. The damage was surgical, not the accidental kind from lightning or faulty wiring. This was deliberate. The fire had been started from inside, by the feed bins, right where the old generator cables ran along the floor. Someone had snuck in, poured accelerant, and lit a fuse. I found the scorch patterns myself, black spirals spidering outward like tattoos of intent. When I reached the northern wall, Deputy Kelly approached. She held out something in a Ziploc bag, what was left of a clipboard, scorched but still visibly labeled with Twin Creeks HOA's logo on a half-melted sticker. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. We both knew what it meant. We're treating this as arson, she said. But without a witness, it'll be hard to stick. I nodded, jaw tight. I have cameras. Check them. Fast. Back at the cabin, I loaded the footage onto a drive and scanned through the east perimeter feed. It was grainy in the low light, but unmistakable. Two figures, moving low to the ground, dressed in dark clothes and masks. One limped slightly, the other moved confidently, almost casually. Then I saw the flash of something metallic on the taller one's wrist, a silver watch. I had seen it before, in HOA meetings, in surveillance footage, on Carl Hopkins himself. I paused the frame, enhanced it the best I could, and sent it to Patrick. Within hours, he had it packaged, time-stamped, and submitted to both the county and the sheriff. We weren't just reacting anymore. We were building a case. That same afternoon, I received an official letter from the Bureau of Land Management. A federal agent would be visiting my property in response to multiple environmental complaints, including obstruction of public land, unlicensed surveillance, and psychological disruption caused by visual installations. I nearly laughed when I read it. Psychological disruption. They were talking about the drone pole we set up 50 feet from the HOA's back gate, a pole that streamed nothing but truth. I met the agent at the gate myself. Black SUV, mirrored sunglasses, federal badge. He was calm, too calm. That kind of calm that tells you he knows he's not here by choice, but by order. "Mr. Walker," he said, "I'm here to review your holdings." I opened the gate and gestured with one hand. "Come in. I've got coffee and receipts." We walked the perimeter together. I showed him the waterline sabotage, the footage from the drone, the documentation of land purchases, all legal, all properly filed. He nodded, took notes, never revealed much. Then he said it, unfortunately, "Until we can verify the full extent of these complaints, we're issuing a temporary freeze on new developments within 500 feet of Twin Creeks." I stared at him. "Let me get this straight. They block my access. They burn my barn. They report me for harassment, and I'm the one getting frozen." He didn't respond, just handed me a sealed notice. The ink was still drying. I sat with Patrick and our paralegal Tara that evening. We reviewed the footage, the fire report, the BLM hold. Patrick slammed his palm on the table. They found a loophole. Tara explained it's some ancient wildlife corridor that hadn't been updated in decades. Technically inactive, but still protected. Carl had used that to file for emergency injunctions under environmental distress. It was legal sabotage, and it would work unless we turned the tide fast. So we pivoted, filed counter-complaints, submitted drone footage of HOA trespass, delivered notarized statements from neighbors who had witnessed HOA harassment. Jason, Megan, Edgar. We had the evidence, but what we needed now was pressure. That's when I decided to go public. We held a press conference at the edge of the disputed trail, just across the line from the HOA's new stone wall. I wore my Stetson, brought Ranger, and let the cameras roll. I'm not a politician. I said I'm a rancher, a veteran, and a man who came home to live in peace. But now I'm the target of a campaign of silence, paperwork, and quiet violence. They poured concrete into my water trench. They burned my barn. And now they're calling the federal government to stop me from walking on land I legally own. I held up the BLM notice. This is what abuse of power looks like. A piece of paper, signed by someone who never stepped foot here before today. The video went viral. Within 24 hours, it was shared on every local forum, 2 radio shows, and even picked up by a regional news station. That night, Megan texted me, "You broke the silence. People are waking up." And they were. Anonymous letters started showing up at my fence neighbors apologizing, thanking me, asking how they could help. But just as things seemed to shift in our favor, another blow landed. I was called to the sheriff's office. Carl had filed a report claiming I had vandalized the HOA clubhouse spray paint, broken windows, computer damage. I was stunned. "You're kidding." I told Deputy Kelly. She shook her head. "He says he saw your truck on the street minutes before it happened. I was home. The cameras proved it. Still, they needed a statement, a formality. They said, but I knew better. Carl was laying the foundation for something bigger. He wasn't just trying to stop me. He was trying to make me look dangerous." That night, just after I returned home from the sheriff's office, something else happened. Ranger growled low from the porch. I stepped outside, flashlight in hand, heart already racing. I scanned the tree line. Movement. 2 shadows darting between the mesquite. Then pop, a loud crack echoed across the field. Not gunfire, not exactly. Fireworks maybe, a distraction. I moved fast. Ranger at my side. We circled the clearing and caught the flicker of something red near the east hay shed. A small fire had been set near the backup generator cables. It hadn't spread, thanks to damp soil from last week's storm, but it could have, easily. I stomped it out, checked the camera mounted to the shed, and sure enough, 2 masked figures. One limping, same silver watch glinting under moonlight. I didn't wait this time. I uploaded everything, called Patrick, and filed it all. The next morning, a criminal investigation into Carl Hopkins was launched. Arson, vandalism, trespassing. False reports to federal agents. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about a system weaponized by one man, and it was starting to collapse under its own lies. Jason called me that afternoon. "You flipped the neighborhood." He said, "There's a petition now. People want Carl out. Some want the whole HOA dissolved." I listened in silence, staring out at the land that had been my family's since before asphalt reached these parts. Then I spoke. "Good, because I'm not done yet. Not until the last brick of that wall comes down. Not until every inch of this land breathes free again." And I meant it, because I'd seen what unchecked power does when hidden behind fences and bylaws. And I knew deep down, this wasn't just a property fight anymore. This was a reckoning. By the time the sun rose on the 4th week since they welded my gate shut, the air around the ranch no longer felt like air, it felt like pressure. It was in every breath, every creak of a fence post, every whisper of wind across the scorched ground where my barn used to stand. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was the kind of silence that came just before something snapped. I spent that morning pacing along the new perimeter we had put up around the eastern edge of Twin Creeks. Tall, reinforced fencing with surveillance poles at each major corner. Every foot of land we had acquired was now secured, patrolled, and monitored. It wasn't paranoia, it was insurance. And still, I didn't feel safe. What I didn't expect that day was the white envelope left on my front gate, no stamp, no return address. Just my name in careful handwriting. Inside was a note from a group of residents from Twin Creeks. Not all of us agree with Carl. It read, "We want change. We want to talk. Thank you for standing up." I read it 3 times before folding it into my pocket. I didn't know whether it was a trap, a distraction, or an olive branch, maybe all 3, but something told me it mattered. Patrick called me an hour later with news Carl had gone dark. No HOA emails, no calls, no statements, just silence. According to one of his legal contacts, Carl hadn't shown up for a scheduled HOA board review meeting. No one knew where he was. His house was dark, mail piling up. He's hiding. Patrick said, he knows what's coming. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to think we had finally forced him into a corner, but I'd learned better by now. Cornered animals don't disappear, they wait, and Carl was the type to reemerge sharper, more vicious, more calculated. That evening, I met with Jason and Megan at the edge of the ranch fence. They brought 2 folding chairs, a cooler of lemonade, and a handwritten proposal. We've drafted a new structure, Jason explained. If Carl gets removed, we want a community agreement, no HOA. Just voluntary participation, mutual upkeep, open access to shared land. We want your input. I didn't say anything right away. I looked down at their hands, nervous, earnest, calloused in the way that only working people's hands are. They weren't activists or rebels. They were tired homeowners who had simply reached their limit. I took the proposal, nodded, and told them I'd read it. That seemed to be enough. They smiled, left the cooler behind, and walked back through the dusk like figures in a story I hadn't known I needed. But stories don't end that cleanly. The next day, a new problem arrived wrapped in legal ink. A notice from the county courthouse informing me of a property tax reassessment because of my land acquisitions and reclassification of surrounding parcels. The county had initiated a full value reassessment of every property inside Twin Creeks. The result projected tax hikes for every homeowner, some up to 4 times their original rate. I stared at the numbers, a bitter taste crawling up my throat. I hadn't planned this. I hadn't lobbied for it. But it was happening. And now the neighborhood, many of whom had finally begun to warm toward me, would see me not as the defender of their rights, but the cause of their suffering. I met with Patrick and Tara that night. We sat outside under a steel blue sky, the ranch lit by soft LED floodlights in the distant orange of a dying day. They're going to blame me, I said. Patrick nodded. Some already are. I rubbed my temples. What if we gave them a choice? Tara raised a brow. What kind of choice? That's how the idea for the Neighbor Relief Pact was born. Under it, any resident of Twin Creeks who contributed volunteer hours toward the upkeep of shared trails, the community garden, or educational programs at the new Ranch Learning Center would receive a land use rebate enough to offset the new tax increases. Not a handout, not guilt money, just a trade participation for relief, contribution for stability. I announced it via printed notices placed directly in each resident's mailbox. No flashy branding, no threats. Just a message that said, you weren't my enemy. Carl was. Let's build something better. The first to respond were Jason and Megan. They brought 4 neighbors, and together we built raised planters behind the old horse stables. Barbara, one of the former board members who had voted against the wall project, organized a book club painting session for the Learning Center exterior. Even Edward, the quiet, stoic former treasurer, installed benches along the scenic loop and inscribed them with names of local veterans. The place began to breathe again. It no longer looked like a war zone. It looked like the beginning of something worth protecting. But then, almost as if summoned by the light, darkness returned. Patrick received an anonymous tip through our legal hotline. A hiker had found a black duffel bag tucked under an old oak stump along the ridge trail. Inside were HOA documents, some real, some forged, receipts of undisclosed transactions, permits with inconsistent signatures, and a burner phone filled with text messages and emails that could tie Carl Hopkins to bribery, fraudulent filings, and obstruction of public access. We turned the bag over to the sheriff immediately. Within 48 hours, a formal warrant was issued. Carl was found in a neighboring state, attempting to negotiate a private land sale using a parcel he didn't legally own. He was arrested on the spot and brought back under charges that ranged from mail fraud to attempted arson. I got the call while fixing a busted irrigation valve. I let the wrench drop, leaned against the post, and just breathed. It wasn't joy, exactly, but well, it was something slower, deeper, vindication wrapped in exhaustion. Later that week, I met with Jason, Megan, and a dozen others at the main gate. They brought coffee and camp chairs. I brought a new sign. Together, we replaced the old barricade, the one Carl's crew had welded, now transformed into a wide-open entrance with a solar-powered gate and a hand-painted sign above it, Private Ranch Community Welcome. Respect is the only fee. There were no speeches, no declarations, just a shared sense of forward motion. But the land still had one more secret to reveal. 3 weeks later, while clearing brush near the northeast ridge, I found something strange buried beneath a rock cluster, an old wooden sign, cracked and faded. The paint was barely legible, but I could still make out the words, "Ranch boundaries may be fenced, but respect should always be open." It was signed Edgar Moreau, 1989. I smiled. We mounted the sign near the new gate, right where the welded bars had once stood. It felt fitting. It felt like closure. Except the county wasn't done. One final letter arrived, not with a threat, but with power. Our petition to reclassify the land as a private ranch district free of HOA jurisdiction had been approved. Permanently. That meant no more complaints, no more forms, no more clipboards. Just land, just people, just responsibility. That night, we held a bonfire the size of a small truck bed. We cooked corn, shared stories, and as the flames roared high, I tossed in an old clipboard I had kept from day one. The metal warped, the plastic curled, and somewhere beneath the stars, I felt something heavy lift off my chest. Ranger barked like he knew it too. We had survived something bigger than paperwork, bigger than fire. We had survived Carl. We had survived silence. And now, finally, we were free. The quiet that settled over Rocking W Ranch after Carl's arrest was unfamiliar, almost suspicious. For months, every morning had started with some kind of battle fires to put out, both literal and legal. Now the only things burning were sunrise colors stretched over the Arizona horizon. I woke each day expecting something, another notice, another visit, another letter soaked in threat, but none came. Carl was gone. The HOA board had been gutted. The land was legally ours. And yet, I couldn't rest. Not completely. Peace, I've learned, doesn't arrive like a trophy. It's earned in layers, slow, deliberate, fragile. And sometimes, even peace comes with a bill attached. 2 weeks after the bonfire where we burned Carl's clipboard and toasted to the future, I received a formal summons from the county courthouse. It wasn't about any complaint, lawsuit, or zoning issue. It was about money, specifically taxes. The reclassification of the land surrounding Twin Creeks into a private ranch district had triggered a ripple effect. Property values across the entire zone had skyrocketed. With the HOA dissolved and Blue Cactus Holdings officially managing the land infrastructure, the county had decided to reassess every parcel within the former HOA boundary. Their verdict was blunt, and final property taxes for homeowners in Twin Creeks would triple, some even quadruple, depending on proximity to newly improved zones. On paper, it made sense. In reality, it felt cruel, because many of the residents who would now suffer had nothing to do with Carl's reign of pettiness. They had kept their heads down, raised their kids, paid their dues, and quietly endured the rules. Now they were collateral damage. I sat on the porch that evening, the letter folded on my lap, untouched whiskey sweating in my glass. Ranger lay beside me, his head resting on my boot. The sky was bruised with dusk, and I couldn't shake the guilt gnawing at my ribs. This wasn't how I wanted the story to end. I didn't fight all this time to become another face of oppression, even if accidental. So I got up, poured the drink back into the bottle, and called a meeting with Patrick and Tara. We needed a solution, not just a loophole, a legacy. We spent days crafting the framework for what we called the Neighbor Relief Pact. The idea was simple: if you live in Twin Creeks and commit volunteer hours toward maintaining the shared land gardens, trails, the learning center, you get a proportional tax offset through land use incentives. It wouldn't make the tax reassessment go away, but it would ease the sting for those who stepped up. More importantly, it would rewire the entire relationship between community and land, not as tenants under a board, but as stewards of shared space. We hand-delivered the proposal to each home ourselves. No fancy email blasts, no pressure tactics, just an invitation to collaborate. The response was cautious at first. Then it grew. Jason and Megan brought another dozen neighbors to help lay the foundation for a solar-powered irrigation system near the trail loop. Barbara and her book club showed up with brushes, paint, and potted flowers for the ranch's new education barn. One couple even offered to host weekend workshops for kids about wildlife tracking and desert sustainability. It wasn't just volunteering. It was ownership, real, human, messy, meaningful. A month later, something unexpected arrived at the ranch gates. A letter, but not from the county, from the State Land Commission. Apparently, our successful establishment of a private ranch district had triggered interest from nearby regions where landowner disputes and HOA overreach had paralyzed development. They wanted to study our model, understand how a decentralized, voluntary stewardship structure could replace traditional community governance. I didn't know whether to laugh or swear. After all the fighting, all the lawsuits, all the late-night paranoia and ranch patrols, someone now wanted to call it a case study. But maybe that's how change always looks in the rear view, neater than it really was. Around the same time, we got news about Carl. The investigation had wrapped up. With the duffel bag evidence, drone footage, witness statements, and forged documents in hand, the prosecution offered a plea deal: 4 years probation, $120,000 in restitution, and a lifetime ban from participating in any community governance structure within the state. Carl took it. No courtroom drama. No redemption speech. He signed the papers, sold his house under a false name to an out-of-state buyer, and disappeared. I wasn't interested in where he went. I was only interested in what stayed behind, because what stayed was this: a ranch transformed, a community rebuilt from the cracks, a road that had once been barricaded now widened and flanked with wildflowers planted by residents who once feared my name. The trails buzzed with life, again kids biking, old-timers walking, laughter rising with the wind. At the sight of the old barricade, we installed a new sign, not a warning, a welcome. It read, "Together, we built something stronger." Rocking Ranch welcomes all who respect the land. Underneath, on a bronze plaque, we etched the words, "In memory of HOA tyranny, may it never return." We held a ribbon-cutting ceremony that Saturday. 60 people showed up. Some brought food, others brought folding chairs. Most just brought themselves. I gave a short speech. No podium, no big declarations, just truth. I told them I didn't fight to win. I fought because nobody should be locked out of their home by strangers who never earned the right to hold keys. I told them the land doesn't care who writes the bylaws, but it remembers who walks it with care. When I finished, Ranger barked once, and the crowd broke into applause that felt real, not rehearsed. Later that evening, just as the last car pulled away and the sky bled into its indigo phase, a red pickup rolled down the ranch path. Dust curled behind it like memory. Edgar stepped out, beard longer, eyes sharper. He didn't say anything at first, just handed me something wrapped in cloth. I unwrapped it slowly, an old, hand-carved sign. It read, "Ranch boundaries may be fenced, but respect should always be open." I nodded, throat tight. Together, we mounted it beside the main gate, where the war had started, where it had also ended. And still, there was one final thread waiting to be tied. A week after the ceremony, Tara informed us the last set of deed transfers had cleared. Every inch of land surrounding what used to be Twin Creeks was now under the stewardship of Rocking W Ranch, or the Neighbor Relief Pact. The map had changed. The power had shifted, and no one could take it back. That night, we lit one last fire, not of anger, not of defiance, but of gratitude. We sat around it, swapping stories, passing around a bottle of aged whiskey Jason had been saving. Megan played a quiet tune on an old harmonica. I looked around at the faces glowing in the firelight, some familiar, some new, none of them enemies, all of them survivors. As the fire cracked and the desert wind hummed, I realized something I hadn't felt in a long, long time: rest. Not just sleep, not just silence, but true rest. The kind that comes when you know you didn't back down, didn't break, didn't become the monster they tried to paint you as. The kind that comes when you've reclaimed more than land. You've reclaimed dignity. So yes, they blocked my gate. So I bought the land beneath their feet. They tried to bury me in fees and files. I answered with fences and facts. And in the end, they paid not just in dues, but in reckoning. And what we built afterward, together, was worth every battle scar. Because this wasn't just my ranch anymore. It was our future, boys. And the only rule now: respect the land, respect each other, or stay out.